Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your Hurricane Pro and HD video discussion, looking at the tropics for the week ahead on Monday, the 11th of August, 2014. First stop, sea surface temperature anomalies. As you can see, pretty warm here in the eastern Pacific, but it is definitely speckled with a few areas of substantially colder than average water temperatures. And then out here towards the central Pacific, definitely saw a cooling of that region. The El Nino did not really get a chance to take shape, but I still think it's coming later in the fall and into the winter. The atmosphere and the ocean just didn't really match up in the spring to get things going in earnest for this time of year. So it looks like we will get to the peak of the hurricane season without technically or officially being in an El Nino situation at all. And so that could be interesting for the rest of the season ahead. Looking at the Atlantic, pretty cool here between Africa and the Lesser Antilles relative to average. There's a few spots in here of above normal. I guess if you averaged it all out, you know, it'd be pretty much where we should be. And I'll show you another graphic in a moment that illustrates that point better. The subtropical Atlantic, all up in here, definitely warmer than it should be, as is a good deal of the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico. Looking at the heat potential, this is a measure of how much upper ocean heat content there is in the Atlantic Basin. This is what I was talking about a moment ago. Here is sort of your lower limit of the noticeable heat content right through here, getting down towards the bottom third of the scale. It certainly is higher than nothing, but we're just starting to show up a little bit. This is difficult to explain in layman's terms. Just think of it as the higher up the scale you go, the more upper ocean heat content is available, meaning that a hurricane can come along or a tropical storm and tap into water that is not just warm at the surface, but it is warm very deep below. And even though that this region is running a little bit below the long-term average, sea surface temperature-wise, it's definitely warm enough, as you can see through here, even getting into some of the lower portions of appreciable upper ocean heat content. The highest of those values, of course, is way over here in the Western Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, where nothing at all has developed this season. And if we do get something moving through there, it's definitely going to have a lot of energy to work with. Nothing out there right now. We do have a tropical wave sitting in here, invest area, 94L in here, lots of dry air around, and that's going to preclude any development anytime soon. And that's mostly owed to the fact that we have this big Saharan air layer literally putting a big blanket on things. However, right in here, you can see that there's a little bit of an erosion, actually a substantial erosion, as more moisture starts to work its way off of Africa with these tropical waves, and this big Bermuda Azores high sitting up here starts to weaken some, lessening the trade winds and the gradient down here of pressure that will keep the Saharan air layer from blasting off like this as we move through the month. Remember, it's only August the 11th. There's still quite a ways to go before we even really start ramping up climatologically speaking, and yet we do have these pretty robust tropical waves coming off. Imagine if we did not have all this dry air, we would easily be 5 named storms and probably 2 or 3 extra hurricanes, maybe even, I mean, if Bertha hadn't had to deal with dry air, just imagine, it probably would have been a hurricane much sooner, and then these other systems would have had a chance to develop. So luckily, for those in coastal dwelling areas, the dry air does keep a cap on things, but when it breaks, you have to watch out and certainly be ready for it. So another way to look at it, sinking air as well, dry sinking air. This is North America right here, and South America, the west coast of Africa, and then I'll outline in yellow, this is your area of subsidence, sinking air in the atmosphere, and you can see all along the tropical Atlantic, there's the west coast of Africa, and here is the Lesser Antilles. I'll take my telestration away for a moment and box it in. Yeah, that's all in the brown, which is indicative of sinking air, so that's not a favorable pattern. What is favorable in the tropical Atlantic is wind shear is actually below the long-term average, which is this line here, and it's been below for quite a while, off and on during the hurricane season, more than it's been above. So it's just really the dry, sinking, stable air mass. If that goes away, then we should see a pretty active time coming up in the Atlantic. How active and where something might track remains to be seen, but several of the key ingredients are definitely there. But you see how just one thing can be pretty substantial, like the dry air mass compared to, a more moist air mass really does put a lid on things. Looking in the Pacific, still active out in this region, another area developing off the coast of Mexico. The good news is it looks like this will track to the west-northwest away from the land areas. We don't quite have the breakdown in the ridge out here enough to allow these systems to turn into Mexico. That typically happens in September and especially October. So for now, if this develops, it should head on off to the west and northwest. One thing I wanted to point out to you, Hurricane Pro in HD has a new feature for you. You can access the Wave Watch models from NOAA right within the app. You just tap on the Atlantic, and then you go down here to the Forecast Models area, tap on that, and voila, you get access to the Wave Watch models. And these are going to be very handy when something is approaching land especially, but even in the off-season you can use this to track winter storms and the big waves that they produce. Surfers, this is great for you to tap into the wave information, Atlantic Significant Wave Heights as it's called. So check that out, a new feature in Hurricane Pro and HD. Pretty easy to access. I'm looking forward to taking a peek at that myself when we do finally get something. I don't want to sound too anxious, but maybe something safely out to sea, sending big swells across. That would be interesting to track. All right, well, that is it. A look at the tropics for the week ahead. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. That's my website, of course. And for Hurricane Pro and HD, it's an honor to be able to hopefully educate you about what's going on out there and leave the sensationalism aside. Believe me, when something forms and it takes aim along the coastline, it'll hype itself. So far, we've been very lucky and haven't had to worry about that too much. Have a good rest of the week ahead. I will talk to you again next Monday.